You hire a really great lawyer because they are that long tail, because they can see beyond that. Let's figure out ways to read things very quickly, present information compactly and in a useful way to a lawyer, and then let them make decisions about what to do.
And so I think the key distinguishing factor is not can the model do this thing, but can the model do this thing at this organization in the way that the organization wants it to do?
There's a fundamental difference between using Claude to go 20% faster on something and fundamentally reimagining a workflow and how that work is done. We're rebuilding this from the ground up because that's the way we think the work should be done today. And I think in our particular industry, that's going to be the winning formula.
Hi, it's really great to see everybody here today. So I'm Chris Manning. I'm a GP at AIX Ventures and have been involved in the firm, as Jason said, right from the founding in 2021, along with Richard Sochers in the back corner. But not so much about me today. Let me get started on introducing our panelists. So I'll go in order across. So first of all, we have Kiran Singh, who is founder of Arcos Labs. And so Arcos Labs is doing these kind of AI-enabled services in the legal industry, and we'll hear more about that later. Then next along, we've got Michelle Huang, and Michelle works as Frontier Counsel at Anthropic. And then last is Sheng Ho, who is the founder of Solvea, which is providing AI-enabled services for private equity due diligence. So we want to sort of speak in the range of, well, what's happening with the frontier lab model providers, and then what the role is of application companies building AI-enabled services on top of that. So I thought we'd start with a couple of questions from Michelle. So from the model provider side, first of all, congratulations. Anthropic's been knocking it out of the park for the last year. So I guess you're sitting in a pretty happy position. But from the point of view of what's required for a company getting started to use Anthropic being successful, like what kind of readiness do they have to have? What do they need to have achieved to be able to trust Anthropic and deploy it successfully in their organization?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to be in a room of builders who are doing such incredibly important work. I should also quickly caveat that I am here speaking on my personal behalf. My views don't reflect Anthropic. What I'm describing doesn't reflect our product or our strategy, yada, yada. But I think you raise a really, really big question and an important question. So one of the things that's been really remarkable in looking how the frontier AI model space has developed over the past couple of months or over the past year is the exponential increase in capabilities. And we're at the point where frontier models have capabilities that are enterprise ready for so many important enterprise use cases in their services. And so I think the key distinguishing factor is not can the model do this thing, but can the model do this thing at this organization in the way that the organization wants it to do? And so I think the important variable there is trust. And what does trust mean? And I think trust has lots of implications across different layers. At the foundation model, it's can we trust that the foundation model performs in the way that it should? Can we measure that? Do we have benchmarks that are relevant for a particular industry that look at the quirks of the industry, the way that enterprises operate in that industry? Can we measure predictability and reliability? And those are the key sort of things that you look at when you sell an AI product to a board or a risk management committee. Thinking about governance, right? When you deploy a tool at an organization, do you have the appropriate procedures in place to make sure that these uses are appropriate? Is the infrastructure, is the data in the organization piped so that your use cases can be effective and trustworthy? And is your organization ready? Do you have all the integrations between the model and the application layer and the infrastructure that you have in your existing tech stack? And how does that all work together? I think that bigger question of enterprise trust and readiness is something that remains a big open. And I also think is a really big opportunity for pie expanding in this space, thinking about ways to get into that gap and building for that gap and scaling for that gap.
Yeah, I'm tempted to sort of try and still dig a bit bigger, deeper into that question, because I presume that you must see that, for some companies or teams inside companies, that they adopt we'll keep it generic. They adopt a frontier large language model and things really take off and they use it successfully and it's great, and other people it sort of never really happens. Are there sort of details about the kind of the people or the kind of organization that you can kind of look at and that seem kind of factors for success or failure?
Maybe I'll speak a little bit about lawyers as a lawyer, and because it's easier for me to sort of speak critically about myself. I think we've seen a lot of successful enterprise adoption for AI in sort of like traditionally more tech adjacent spaces. So think about the success of coding tools as an example. I don't think that we've seen as much penetration or success in the legal space, in part because there isn't a singular product or a singular surface or a singular tool that resonates across all the different ways in which people are lawyers. What it means to be a lawyer in-house is fundamentally different than what it means to be a lawyer in a big law firm. In a big law firm, being a litigator is very different than being a tech transactions lawyer. And then you have this long tail of like the broader legal market that is still largely untouched. So think about sort of civil legal services, spaces where you have need for high volume legal services at low cost. There's a lot of work towards alternative dispute resolution and family law courts and housing courts, things like this, which AI has largely not touched at all. And then you have smaller mid-market lawyer and legal practices where I think adoption has been a little bit more spiky. And so getting to that, it requires thinking through the product and the application layer in a way that resonates to those people. So, having pure capability in isolation without having a product that understands how workflows tend to happen is not going to work. And so, as a person who has worked at a big law firm and seen how lawyers struggled with like typical chatbot interfaces because it doesn't work with their systems, or looking at law firms whose client matter management systems or file management systems aren't connected to the AI tools that they're using, it just fundamentally limits the possibility of the workflows that can be automated and that can be enhanced with AI. So thinking through that, and that's the expertise of this group.
There still seems like there's a lot of naivete about what lawyers are doing, right? So obviously they're under a lot of stress and pressure to produce work product, but it seems like every 2 weeks there's another newspaper article about some lawyer being called out for having put bogus cases in a legal brief because it was generated by another leading LLM. And I mean, it's not surprising that happened a few dozen times, but somehow it's still happening every 2 weeks, right? So is there a large education component or retraining component, for sort of having successful use of legal services? Is that something that's going to really require a lot of restructuring companies and education?
I think that's right, but I think that there's both a human problem and a technical problem. So sort of in the short term, you're right that there's a human problem. What's really interesting about these models is that the capabilities they develop are spiky. So you may have heard of the term like jagged frontier. I think that's pretty accurate. And it may be challenging at any given point in time to know exactly where the frontier is jagged and maybe where it's a little bit depressed. And so going through the education of understanding where frontier models may have limitations, where these tools in general may have limitations, where they may not be suitable for deployment, that's really important. I also think it's worth thinking about the incentives in a particular service industry and sort of like thinking about building the product around those incentives. So if you're a junior associate and you've been working for 20 hours already and you're about to file a brief, and you've been dumped this completely new version of a brief and asked to site check 100 different cases in an hour, it's likely that you might make a mistake, even though there are tremendous professional consequences. But that in itself is an opportunity to think about how the product or application can enhance that and to mitigate that risk. The technical question I think exists is a little bit more complicated. Coming back to sort of like the beginning of the conversation, as we think through more agentic uses, what's really interesting is that I think our traditional models for mitigations, like disclosure, human in the loop, reviewing everything exhaustively as a human, are no longer going to be tractable. And so the question is, how do we design technical frameworks that give people who are providing the service, who may have professional obligations to vouch for the service, give them control and autonomy over the relevant aspects of the service, while also unlocking the benefits of scale and speed? And I don't know that puzzle has been quite solved yet across the product or application layer.
Cool. One last question for now before we move on a theme that I will definitely come back to, and that's the balance between the core foundation model provider versus deep application companies. How much of AI services space in particular, let's say in the legal industry, can a major LLM provider company bite off, and how much of it is best handled by a deep application company? In your opinion. We'll hear different opinions later.
So I'd resist the temptation, I think, that this is zero sum, because I genuinely don't think that it is. I think the jagged frontier is a really good example. I think it will remain the case that intelligence and capabilities for frontier models develop in unexpected ways, or present themselves in unexpected ways, or present risks in unexpected ways. And the value add of the product or application layer is truing up that gap and building the trust. And that like manifests in a number of different ways, right? It's like physically plugging in that gap, but it's also thinking about ways that these risks may be different for the particular industry or service or vertical that you're in, and having that deep knowledge with that industry or vertical, and building products for that. I think the legal market is a great example of this. It's useless if you give Claude to a law firm if you don't think about the ways in which you can integrate with its file management systems, if you don't understand the research tools that they use, because it's not just Westlaw. If you're doing international law arbitration, it's a completely different system. There are just completely different places that people look at data, different mechanical actions that you do as a lawyer, and then also just completely untouched markets. I think that is really where the opportunity sits.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let me move on to Kiran and Sheng, who are both building deeply in particular applications, but at least at the moment, their companies aren't as well known as Anthropic. So maybe, Kiran, do you first want to say a couple of minutes, borrowing the microphone from Michelle, say a couple of minutes on what is Arcos and what are you building?
Thanks for the introduction. Arcos is a technology-enabled law firm. Our view on this is there's a lot of great opportunities to be done with existing foundation models, but there's a lot of, I would say, structural and procedural things you can input into a software platform that makes it very, very useful for lawyers to be very effective at their work. We primarily focus on private market capital allocators, so that's private equity, venture, funds of funds, and family offices. I think I saw a couple people with name tags that said something partners, so if you hate your law firm, come talk to me afterward. Our view on this is that, very similar to you, Michelle, that like every lawyer lawyers differently. And it's our responsibility as software engineers to try to capture that. In fact, one of the failure modes of legal tech over the last 10 years, in my opinion, is You had a handful of engineers talk to 2 lawyers and say, this is the way that workflow works. And then they just like bang together a SaaS tool. That is nightmare fuel for lawyers because they want to do it their way. In fact, by doing that, by saying this is the one workflow we're going to do, you lose all of their incredible training, expertise, and intuition. So our view is let's bring out the best lawyers and make them 10 times, 100 times more effective than they would have been without software.
Do you want to say a bit more about that? Like what parts of the workflows have you got AI doing or want to have AI doing versus in which places are you using humans and want to use humans?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's kind of down to standardization. So there's a lot of buzz right now around AI native services. I'm sure you guys have read various playbooks that exist out there and people talking about this. And the existing standard is, have an LLM do 90% of the work and then some, half pretty good authoritative person checking it over at the end. The problem with that is that you're standardizing on your output. You're basically saying, my belief is that the LLM's mode of the distribution I'm selecting for, like say you're doing an NDA, is the correct thing to do, but that's not useful, right? You hire a really great lawyer because they are that long tail, because they can see beyond that. So our view is we should be standardizing on our inputs. We should say, let's figure out ways to read things very quickly, present information compactly and in a useful way to a lawyer, and then let them make decisions about what to do, and then generate things after that. So that you want to bring smart, capable professionals with credentials, this is an important one, and give them as much control as humanly possible.
Okay, and I think it'd probably be good for the audience to say a little bit more about this concept of an AI native law firm, because in the legal AI space, I guess they're the biggest players at the moment, Harvey and Legora, and they're doing one thing, and you've got a kind of a different model as to what is the right business model for the future of AI and law. Do you want to say a couple of...
Oh gosh, I can talk for hours about this one.
Say 2 minutes and
2 minutes. Where'd I be on this one? There's a lot of people trying to do, I would say AI native software providers for law. And these are people doing like NDAs or MSAs or simple things, right? Things that they can say, this is roughly what a standardized output should look like. And then they just commit to an LLM churning that out. The problem with those companies is Claude's going to eat their lunch, right? They're not competing against Kirkland Ellis. They're competing against in-house counsel just buying $20 Claude subscriptions. And so, the reason like it's useful to do this is there's 3 reasons you hire a lawyer, right? And one is some arbitrary work product, right? So the existing tech-enabled services out there, they say like, okay, I'm going to give you some work product and that's the end of the day. The second thing they sell you is the trust and reassurance that you are being taken care of. If you're doing a $50 million or $1 billion acquisition, you want to know someone's checking in on this. And then the third part is it's actually a form of risk mitigation. So part of the reason you hire an external firm is either you don't have the expertise to do it yourself internally, or you're actually trying to outsource the risk yourself.
Okay, well, maybe that's a right moment to move over to Sheng, and if you want to give him the mic for a moment, because he's precisely in the business of when people are doing $50 million deals of giving them the due diligence. Okay, do you want to say first a few remarks about Solvea and what your company does?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think 50 million is probably the smallest deal we've ever looked at. I think the average size is like 500 to $1 billion to a couple $1 billion. So it's really important stuff. Effectively, Solvea is an AI native management consulting firm. What we do today is work with private equity funds all the way at the mega fund size down to the mid-market on buy-side diligence. And so historically, what this was a McKinsey team, so someone like myself, 5 of us running around for 2 to 4 weeks, doing expert calls and surveys and all sorts of market research to form a point of view. Highly complex, highly trained work done by these people that we think today can be done better by AI. And so today on our side, in a very similar way to how an AI native law firm is structured, half to 2/3 of our team are software engineers from great places. The other half to a third people used to do the job. And so these are consultants from MBB, private equity investors from places like TPG, who ultimately help us do the judgment work that's required in this work, while AI automates the intelligence.
Okay, well, sort of the same question I asked Kiran, right? In your solution, which parts are done by AI, or you hope will very soon be done by AI, and which parts are done by humans, and you think is important to have the human in the loop?
Yeah, so There's, I think, three components to this. There's AI that does human work or what used to be done by humans better and faster. And so tangibly speaking, for example, this is AI that finds experts, in any niche industry that you might imagine, interviews them, gathers these insights in a very short frame of time. I used to do these 50 interviews over 4 weeks. Now AI can do this in a couple of days. That's one. The second is to do work that humans couldn't do, and to the point of like jagged intelligence, this is where models actually outperform humans in some ways. And so a huge problem in our industry is the quality of the data you gather and knowing whether someone's real or not. Because with ChatGPT, everyone sounds like an expert. How do you actually know this person was employed in the hospital and bought this piece of software? And so on our side, we use the frontier models to basically detect the fraud that occurs in this industry so that you actually know you're gathering really good insight. No amount of human training can detect this in real time in 5 minutes on a call. The last part of it is where the humans come in, and this is where it's really about exception handling and the last mile. When you're deploying $1 billion, which is the current deal we're working on, you have to know that everything you found is right. And sometimes the answer lives a little bit in the gray, right? And so I'll give you an example. It's like we interviewed 50 people, 45 of them said X and 5 of them said Y. You would be inclined to think that 45 people probably got it right. But turns out the 5 people that said Y used to be the former C-suite executives at their competitors. And so actually, they probably know something that you don't. And so again, every scenario requires a human touch in that instance. And that's where we're building the judgment into the harnesses that we're training to get to that final mile delivery for our clients.
Okay, and maybe then I'll ask for the last question for you from right now. The big picture speculative question, right? So you've already mentioned how you're doing the kind of work that large consulting groups used to do, or also still doing, I guess. But overall, in a much broader industry, right? There's the BCGs and the Andersons and the Deloittes, all of these huge consulting groups. I mean, what do you think is the future with those consulting groups? Will they become competitive using AI? Do you think they'll be replaced by new AI native firms like yours in different areas? Do you have any sense of how the future's emerging?
Well, I'm obviously biased, so don't take my word as investment advice. Look, I think if you look at the market structure of consulting, a lot of value accrues to the top, simply because there's a brand component of it and there's a compounding data component to it. And so you have MBB and then you have kind of the rest. It's my point of view that the mid-market is effectively going to disappear because there's no real moat for a lot of these players. You'll have brand accrue for a long time, but the problem with adopting technology to that point is there's a fundamental difference between using Claude to go 20% faster on something and fundamentally reimagining a workflow and how that work is done. The senior partner at BCG is still gonna text his associate and ask him for comments at 2 a.m. at night, and that's just never gonna change the way they work. We're rebuilding this from the ground up because that's the way we think the work should be done today. And I think in our particular industry, that's gonna be the winning formula in the future.
Cool. Okay, maybe I'll go back to Kiran and ask you both a question, which is sort of the complement of the final question I asked Michelle. So, Kiran, when you're thinking about your business, how much does your business depend on the quality of the core model, whether it's sort of what you just start off with or what you might fine tune or specialize, versus how much of it is how you structure and constrain and build workflows using foundation models, or how much of it is it's your closest to customers and their problems? What are the real secret sources of you being successful?
Yeah, I think there's one particular reason you hire great lawyers, right, at great law firms, is they have market knowledge no one else does, right? They've seen things no one else can, right? When you go to Kirkland & Ellis and hire your favorite partner there, is because they've seen a lot of deals that look like this up and down the capital stack. Ultimately, I think that's going to be one of our biggest moats, that those things can't be encoded into weights. And then again, I think the other parts of the secret sauce is that, if you want to have great outcomes, you need to have really great lawyers doing things that are a little bit outside the box. The problem with calling an LLM is you're sampling from a distribution, right? So you're going to get the mode every single time, which is effectively like saying, I want the average result. And if you're, doing important stuff, you don't want an average result.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask Sheng basically the same question as to where do you think is the distinctive value your company provides?
Yeah, I very much resonate with Kiran there around quality of people, of who we hire, because in a world where you've got thousands of consultants, a lot of the value really accrues to the 10%, 1% even, that have sort of unique insight and or differentiated skill and expertise. And so if you imagine in our case, we deal with huge quantities of data. In a typical engagement, we might have 50 hours of interviews and 50,000 survey data points and hundreds of reports. And so in a world where AI allows us to generate infinite amounts of data, what's really important is actually the pattern recognition of knowing what really matters and why. And that experience for a long time has been locked in the heads of very senior individuals at these places. And so what we're doing is building the harnesses that replicate that work. People call it context engineering, but effectively it's knowing what really matters to work with the frontier models that already have the capability to process that. So that's where we think the value is going to go.
Cool. So we can go back to Michelle. So really the last question, and after this, we'll take a few questions from the audience. So if you've got questions, now's a good time for you starting to think of those. The last question, which in different ways applies to every company, is the question of differentiation versus commoditization. So if I start off thinking more from the space of the model provider, there's been stunning progress in the last 6 months that the ability to give tasks to models is just stunningly better than it used to be, that you can just give complex tasks to these models and get a lot of the time great answers. And so, that is awesome, and that's bringing a lot of business, but there are clearly multiple players that are delivering those sort of results, and among other things, as well as the leading providers in the US, there are Chinese companies that are producing now what are actually pretty good models. Some of the models like Kimi K2.5, Minimax, etc. So there's a real question still as to, well, as a company, what's the best way to differentiate and have a defensible company in the longer term? What do you think is important for a model provider to achieve that?
This is a great and deep question. I mean, I think it's really interesting because I think so many of the open source models that you refer to, the predominantly Chinese models, are so good already. I mean, leaps and bounds better than I think anything that we could have imagined years ago. But I think, so if we view frontier intelligence and sort of the maximum of capabilities at the human level, then it may be true that there's not much more to push. If we think that it's possible to develop intelligence and capabilities beyond what we can conceive of today, then I think there will always be a frontier to explore. I don't know the answer to that question. You probably know the answer better than I do. But I'm optimistic that there are ways that we can continue to push the frontier.
Okay, well, maybe I'll move to Kiran and sort of the same question at a different level. I mean, clearly there are going to be lots of law companies and lots of legal AI companies. So how are you thinking about how to be differentiated and maintain a kind of a long-term differentiation that will make you successful?
Yeah, I think I have this fundamental belief that quality is your first moat. I think too many people try to rely on network effects or some data privilege or something. Ultimately, the quality of your output to clients and the experience they have is your absolute number one priority. It is the only thing that matters. We talk a lot, especially lately, about enshittification, excuse my language, of software lately. Software's getting kind of bad. A lot of really great stuff is like kind of doing some weird stuff. You can tell there's like internal structures in the way the products are developing. I think making sure that you maintain an extremely high bar for what is good and what is acceptable and the way client experiences are delivered is actually very, very important. Um, I think how we maintain that is about really comes down to internal culture. How do you build a team that always cares, like first and foremost, about making sure that that client experience is perfect?
Okay, cool. Let's go to Sheng. And okay, what's the secret of differentiating and maintaining Solvea as a strong, distinctive player that people stick to?
Yeah, I think quality at scale is the key thing here, because any single person can be phenomenal, but can you do this when you have a team of 100, 1,000, you know, beyond even scaling with your own people, as your clients scale, can you continue to make them happy? And culture is one thing. I think one thing that's tangible on the outside is really the quality of the data that you generate. And I think from our point of view, we're effectively a vertical data labeling company where people at the frontier are generating the highest quality work because their incentive is to deliver great experiences to their clients. That's a self-reinforcing cycle almost around the quality of the output that's going to be achieved. And I think what we've seen, from some of the leading frontier labs is that that is ultimately what creates a distinctive advantage. And so from our point of view, this is the pair programming equivalent of someone and a consultant doing the most sophisticated work and in turn making our harness better.
Cool. Okay. So maybe we could take a few questions from the audience. Let's see. I can maybe pass the mic around.
You guys share that one. Okay.
Hello. Yeah. I have a question for Michelle. If we compare OpenAI with Anthropic, OpenAI started earlier, had more funding, more number of employees. It had the pioneer advantage, being the first in the field. But then recently, in some private markets, Anthropic enterprise value is higher than OpenAI. My question is, how is this possible? Like, what is happening in Anthropic that the product and development is so good and the AI models it's making? Do you think it's a matter of mindset? Is it management? Is it better talent? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I can only speak on my personal experience. But so, Anthropic's thing is that we endeavor to offer the best intelligence through our models, and like market best. And I think that has been a differentiating factor for us. I mean, I know that the frontier and who's at the frontier continues to shift over time. But having that, laser focus is, I think, a big part of it. Another, I think, is just culture. So we have a Claude for legal services type product. And what's been really interesting about that as a member of the legal team is the role in which I've had in shaping that, and sort of the collaborative culture around building, really leaning into, as folks have mentioned on this panel, like expertise, people who have the expertise, understanding that and using that to drive the shape of the product or the application layer. There are probably lots of other things here too, as the brilliant people who I get to support on the research team, shaping what intelligence looks like and in technology and all of this. But I think those are two big components.
Hey, folks. So this question is for all of you. You guys talked about the fact that in both finance and legal, you have this long tail of use cases. A lot of firms have niche workflow and also what they consider to be their secret sauce, and they like their own particular way of doing things. What is your approach or philosophy on walking down this long tail and being able to sufficiently address large enough size of the market? Or do you just think, hey, we're just going to go after the top guys, and at some point, we're just not going to worry about the long tail?
Who wants to go first? Some order. Kiran, do you want to go first? Do you have the mic?
I think there's a piece here about building a software platform that's flexible enough to handle anything. And that was a really core part of our philosophy when we started. I mentioned before, like this idea of like, oh, I'll just build a software platform to spit out the same thing for every client. Like every client wants something different, and every lawyer wants to lawyer differently to get there, right? So that's like two different long tails that are converging, right? That you have to account for. And so our view, and I joke about this a little bit because it's sort of true, but we effectively built a programming language, right? That's how you should think about what the Arcos platform does. And this is something we train our lawyers up on to use very customly, and they get really great outcomes. And if a client has some specific niche thing, it's like, great, well, I'm going to build a new program to do that.
So I think perhaps to clarify, I think what you're saying is there are many ways of skinning the cat in terms of getting to the end outcome for the client, which is ultimately what matters. In our point of view, there are many things you can learn from the variety of firms, which is why we've hired people from each of these places. We have, for example, people literally from McKinsey, BCG, Bain, who all do things slightly differently, as well as a bunch of other private equity funds. But it is our view that there is value to having an opinion on how that work gets done and reinforcing that through the data you capture. And so we learn from the best, but then we iterate further into what is the net new best way of doing it, and that becomes our firm's way of doing it. And that, in many ways, ends up becoming part of the secret sauce.
Yeah. Do you have a thought on that too, Michelle?
Just to say, I think technologies like this allow you to lean into the secret sauce. Like if you can create some tool or some product that allows you to do this thing the way that like embodies your judgment in the specific way that your practice does it, and that's tremendously powerful. And I think that that's what folks have been doing across the model and product layer.
Hi, folks. This is for the AI services companies. How are you thinking about that feedback loop feeding into the harness and the model, or just the harness? Like, where do you start thinking about unlocking the model as well for that feedback loop versus maybe just staying at the harness for some reason or the other?
I have tons of opinions about this. Okay. Yes, you can do stuff like adding a skill. That's like adding to your harness, right? We're also pretty model agnostic. Like we run our own models that are fine-tuned for very specific tasks. Like we've seen this one kind of table ingestion and we hate everything that exists, so we're just gonna fucking build our own, right? Like that's okay, you can just do that. I think the trick is in like, if you're delivering great things for clients, you should be saying like, I will do whatever it takes to get that outcome. If I have to like go buy 12 GPUs, I'm gonna go do that, right?
I probably agree. Maybe we're not quite at that stage yet, but we're very much focused on the harness specifically. You've got some of the best capitalized and most successful businesses in the world doing all the frontier research to improve the models. It feels like an early bet that it's too early to effectively be fine-tuning on top of that. But ultimately, what matters is that you're compounding data in the right way. And so, again, we're focused on data quality that's being generated and not anything else.
Yeah, I'm Sandy. Well, I'm building like behavioral model trained on professional data at work. So my question to kind of AI native service providers is like, when there's one like AI native agency, there's like 10 more or 100 more traditional agencies who are not really using their data. So do we realistically like expect all of them to fine tune or make use of their own data for their services, or are there a place for the like a third party kind of infra layer that enable or empower all those companies?
I can go first on this one. I think ultimately the value accrues to who holds the customer relationship and who generates the data. And in our perspective, we work very closely with our clients and they trust us, and that trust therefore gives us the right to generate the highest quality data in the world. And that's going to be our compounding advantage. Is there a space for a service that lets us take advantage of that data? Potentially. We might not want to scale our own infra for a bunch of different reasons, but that's probably where I draw the line.
I'm not sure I have an answer for this one for once. I think every big law firm will say, "Oh, we have market for this. We have a big database," but they're not looking at it, right? Like it's the last 3 deals in their head, and they kind of like, "All right, this is market," right? And so I think like the idea of like a data play or data advantage as being the key thing differentiating us as a law firm isn't really like a priority for us, right? Yeah.
In some sense, this is the question of, is building your AI native standalone law firm, and other people presumably also build standalone AI law firms, the right answer, or is being an infrastructure play servicing existing law firms the right answer, right? Isn't that sort of the question?
Yeah, I'm just sort of unconvinced that the big law, AmLaw 25 firms are going to say like, we have this big thing of data, we're going to build our own model. I remember Bloomberg tried this. They're like, we have our own Bloomberg model now. What does that do? And I can tell you, like, we worked on this at Google. Like, training big models on a bunch of very specific legal corpora without the individual steps of how you got there makes models worse at everything, right? They get dumber at absolutely every single task. So one of the things we think about is like, what are the steps our lawyers took to get to an outcome? Those are things that are interesting to us. Those are data moats for us.
Hi. You mentioned that like it seems like the biggest problem is the mode collapse, that, the main difference is human lawyers are really good at understanding the long tail and the differences, but ChatGPT or models, they collapse on the mode. So if we get better alignment that is more pluralistic, we can capture modes. Like if we do other things that fix mode collapse in other modes, do you think it's going to help? Like, is that really the only mode that, just because ChatGPT averages, then look?
Here's the question. Where will the model providers get that data?
Oh, no.
Most of it is private. That's the problem.
Yeah, but like, in-house, they can like train their own models.
Sure.
So that solves it. That's it.
No. I mean, this is back to my original thing, right? Like training on the final output of legal corpora doesn't do a lot.
Well, it won't be final. Like they can just annotate it, add all the context. It's all about the context, right? If you add more harness, more context, then
I mean, this could be a company. Maybe you found it, right? Just go gather everyone's data and all their red lines at every single phase of it. You could do that.
Okay. Sure, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I think you've got a kind of a valid point, right? That, clearly there's a need to get into this long tail and more precise understanding, but there is a question as to, really, I think for what everyone's been talking about, there's been a fairly good balance between humans and AI and wanting to have humans involved early and often in how the work is done. But there is a future-looking question of, well, if you can then start, capturing what's happening in each case that you're handling, and you can see where the human intervened, what they did, what they added, and so you've got all of this sort of private data inside this vertical. Could you then start to be automating that with AI as well?
Yes.
No comment.
And sorry, Chris, just to make sure I understand the question, it's around where the value accrues, or who really is ultimately responsible for owning the data? Is that the question?
No, it's more around, can the part that the human does. Yeah.
So I think it again comes down to incentives, right? I think if you take coding as an example, there are many, many people in the world who code and put stuff on open source and it's all accessible, and hence why coding's been probably the space where people have iterated the fastest and got into what looks like approaching the global maxima on coding, at least for the frontier models. And I think in spaces like legal and consulting or private equity work, you don't just have people on the street doing this. It's high value service, hyper concentrated in a handful of firms. And so at least my bet is that the fastest way to generate the most amount of data here is to ultimately be the service provider where you are trusted by people, more clients come back, that builds your data loop of generating more data, you have the best service, and then you compound that in both clients and data. And so again, I think it really just comes down to incentives and where people are going to be focused. This data just does not exist on the internet.
Thanks for those answers. One more question. Okay.
Hey, this is a question for all the panelists, but you guys brought up the concept of labor. Where do you see your firms all 3 years from now? Is it going to be heavily dominated by the engineers or by the subject matter experts like the lawyers and the management consultants?
I really like having a 4-to-1 ratio. I want to try to keep that. It's like good culture fit. Like 4 engineers to 1 lawyer, right? I don't know what it'll look like in the long run. I think success for me looks like we never get bigger than 200 or 300 people, and we're still doing incredible amounts of revenue and work. That's how you scale capacity, right? Like your goal should be to increase the total factor productivity of any lawyer on the planet. Like that is my #1 goal. That's why I write software. And so the question is like, well, if we can do that and coding agents get better and better, how many more engineers do I need? Maybe I don't need that many. Maybe I don't need that many lawyers at that point.
I have a quick take about this, which is, so in addition to the fact that I think we need to refine what it means to have a human involved in an AI loop, I think over the next couple of years, we'll wrangle with the idea of what it means to offer a professional service or a regulated service, i.e., do I physically, as a lawyer, have to be involved in reviewing every single piece of advice that I give? Or is there something that I can delegate to AI? And what does delegation look like? Or what does responsible delegation look like? I think that will put, like, whether that question is resolved, will put a lot more pressure on the ultimate outcome than some of the technology itself.
Yeah, so across the 2 things, engineers versus domain experts, if Anthropic has its way, maybe the engineers, to Kiran's point, they can focus on other exciting projects. So I can't comment on that. But look, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to what clients want and where the world converges. And there's one reality where people are so comfortable with AI that our product becomes standalone and people interface with technology as the end service delivery. And there's another world where ultimately all that's left is the human relationship. And so people are unlocked to focus on the most creative of tasks and the most personal of tasks, which really is building a relationship with someone, which is quote unquote the service delivery. And so both those futures exist. Either way, I think there'll be a place for people in building that. And I think what we're designing our business to be is the best platform for the best talent to achieve the most in their career.
Okay, so we're really getting now out into the bigger issues of human-centered AI and where the lasting value in human beings is. And as Sheng was starting to talk about, I mean, I think there are very good arguments that in many of these services, industry places, that for reasons of sort of trust, relationship, ability to communicate, for opening up new lines of business, it seems there's a fairly strong argument that there's an enduring reason to have humans in the loop, even if the AI systems are very technically knowledgeable. But that's another huge topic, which we're not really going to have time to fully resolve tonight. But I hope this has been a good chance to sort of see how that we are in this exploding world of AI-enabled services, and that how it's dependent on harnessing the deep domain knowledge in many different domains. Tonight we've concentrated on the legal and close to legal due diligence domain because that's who our speakers are, but obviously the same issues appear in other domains that are more sort of financial, etc. as well. But we're seeing this era in which there's this huge new opportunities to be building these AI-enabled services. And then we're seeing this competition between companies that are specialized in deep domains and building in those domains, but then equally also the large Frontier Labs are also increasingly standing up organizations to deliver AI-enabled services. So we're going to see an interesting and exciting future for the next few years, I think.